The Second Amendment, ratified in 1791 as part of the Bill of Rights, remains one of the most debated components of the U.S. Constitution. To understand its historical context, it's crucial to examine both the grievances and concerns of the era, which shaped its inclusion and formulation. Historical grievances and the legacy of English law. The historical backdrop of the Second Amendment is deeply rooted in English legal traditions and the experiences of American colonists. In England, the right to bear arms was closely linked to the notion of self-defense and resistance to oppression. The English Bill of Rights of 1689, which allowed Protestants to have arms for their defense, reflected a historical concern about the abuse of power by the monarchy. This principle influenced the American colonists, who were wary of centralized authority. Colonial America experienced numerous tensions with the British government, particularly regarding issues of governance and personal freedoms. The British Crown's attempts to control colonial militias and disarm local populations contributed significantly to the revolutionary sentiment. The British restrictions on arms, such as the prohibition of gun ownership for certain colonists, were perceived as direct threats to the settlers' security and autonomy. The Revolutionary Era and the need for self-defense. The American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783, further reinforced the importance of armed self-defense. The colonists' struggle for independence from Britain highlighted the necessity of militias and armed resistance. The revolutionaries saw their right to bear arms as integral to their fight for freedom and as a safeguard against potential despotism. The experience of fighting a war with a well-armed, decentralized militia led many Americans to believe that a similar right should be enshrined in their new constitution. The post-war period brought its own challenges. The Articles of Confederation, the first governing document of the United States, proved inadequate for maintaining order and security. The inability of the Confederation government to maintain a standing army or adequately defend its borders prompted fears of vulnerability to both internal and external threats. As the Constitution was drafted, there was a strong desire among the framers to address these concerns and ensure that the new government could not infringe upon the rights of individuals to protect themselves and their property. The debate and compromise. During the Constitutional Convention of 1787, the issue of a standing army and the potential for government overreach was a significant concern. Some delegates were apprehensive about the federal government having too much power, especially in the realm of military force. They argued that a well-regulated militia was essential to preserving the security of the free state and preventing tyranny. The ratification debates were marked by vigorous discussion over the balance of power between the federal government and the states. The Anti-Federalists, who were wary of a strong central government, advocated for the inclusion of a Bill of Rights to protect individual liberties. Their concerns included the potential disarmament of the populace and the establishment of a tyrannical government. The Second Amendment emerged as a compromise to address these fears. It was seen as a way to reassure Anti-Federalists that the right to bear arms would be preserved and that the states would retain the ability to organize militias for their own defense. The text and its implications. The language of the Second Amendment reflects the framers' intent to protect both individual and collective rights. The amendment states, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed." This wording underscores the dual purpose of the amendment, ensuring that the state could maintain a militia while safeguarding the individual's right to possess arms. The emphasis on a well-regulated militia suggests that the framers envisioned a system where the state and federal governments could jointly ensure the security of the nation. At the same time, the phrase, "the right of the people to keep and bear arms," was intended to protect individual rights against potential government encroachments. Legacy and interpretation. Over time, the interpretation of the Second Amendment has evolved. Early interpretations focused on the collective right of states to maintain militias. However, in the 20th and 21st centuries, the emphasis has increasingly shifted towards an individual's right to possess firearms. Landmark Supreme Court cases, such as District of Columbia versus Heller, 2008, and McDonald v. City of Chicago, 2010, have further shaped the modern understanding of the Second Amendment, affirming an individual's right to own firearms for self-defense within the home. The Second Amendment's historical context reveals a complex interplay of historical grievances, revolutionary experiences, and philosophical debates. It was crafted as a safeguard against potential government tyranny and a means of preserving personal and collective security. Understanding this context is crucial for comprehending the amendment's enduring significance and the ongoing debates surrounding gun rights and regulation in contemporary America. The language of the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed, is both succinct and layered with meaning. To fully appreciate its significance, it is essential to dissect the key phrases and understand their implications in both historical and contemporary contexts. A well-regulated militia. The phrase, a well-regulated militia, reflects the historical context of the late 18th century, where militias played a crucial role in both state and national security. At the time, a militia was generally understood as a group of armed citizens organized to defend their community and country. Unlike a standing army, which many feared could be used to oppress the populace, militias were seen as a safeguard against tyranny and external threats. The term, well-regulated, in the 18th century implied that the militia should be properly organized, trained, and equipped, though not necessarily under constant government oversight. It suggested a level of order and discipline to ensure that the militia could function effectively. The use of well-regulated also implied that the militia's organization should be reasonable and suitable to maintain the security of the state, being necessary to the security of a free state. The clause being necessary to the security of a free state emphasizes the importance of a militia for the protection of a free society. The framers were concerned with ensuring that the newly formed United States, a republic without a standing army, would be able to defend itself from both foreign and domestic threats. In the context of the post-Revolutionary War period, this phrase underscored the belief that a well-armed citizenry was essential for maintaining the freedom and independence of the state. The concept of security of a free state also reflects the framers' concern with protecting individual liberties against potential government overreach. By ensuring that a militia could be maintained, they aimed to create a system of checks and balances that would help safeguard democratic governance. The right of the people to keep and bear arms. The phrase, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, enshrines the individual right to possess and carry weapons. This portion of the amendment has been the focus of significant debate and interpretation over the centuries. The use of the people, rather than the militia, in this context suggests a recognition of individual rights, which was crucial for the framers' objective of protecting against potential government tyranny and preserving personal freedoms. Keep and bear arms was understood to mean the right to possess weapons and to carry them for personal defense. The terminology was consistent with the notion that an armed populace was a key element in ensuring both personal and communal security. The broad language used here left room for interpretation regarding the types and scope of arms that individuals could possess. Shall not be infringed. The final clause, shall not be infringed, is a strong affirmation of the protection of this right. The use of shall not implies an absolute prohibition against any governmental actions that would undermine or violate this right. It reflects the framers' intent to make it clear that the right to bear arms was to be preserved and protected from government interference. This phrase was designed to ensure that the right to keep and bear arms would remain inviolate, acknowledging the historical experiences and philosophical beliefs of the time. The absolute nature of "shall not be infringed" underscores the commitment to safeguarding this right against both direct and indirect encroachments. Interpretation and evolution. The interpretation of the Second Amendment has evolved significantly since its ratification. Initially, the focus was on the collective right of states to maintain militias. Over time, however, the emphasis has shifted towards an individual right to possess firearms. This shift has been influenced by various legal, political, and social factors, including landmark Supreme Court cases such as District of Columbia v. Heller, 2008, which affirmed an individual's right to possess a firearm for self-defense within the home. The language of the Second Amendment continues to be a focal point of legal and political debate. Contemporary discussions often revolve around balancing individual rights with concerns about public safety and regulation. The amendment's language, while seemingly straightforward, encompasses a range of interpretations and implications that reflect both the historical concerns of the framers and the evolving nature of American society. In summary, the language of the Second Amendment encapsulates a complex set of historical concerns and philosophical principles. By examining the meanings of well-regulated militia, necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, and shall not be infringed, we gain insight into the framers' intent and the enduring debates surrounding this fundamental aspect of American constitutional law. The debate over the Second Amendment has largely centered around two primary interpretations: the collective right and the individual right. Each perspective reflects different understandings of the amendment's intent and application. Collective right interpretation. The collective right interpretation posits that the Second Amendment protects the right to bear arms solely within the context of a well-regulated militia. Proponents of this view argue that the amendment was designed to ensure that states could maintain militias for defense and security purposes, rather than guaranteeing an individual's right to possess firearms independently of such a group. Historical context. Historically, this interpretation is grounded in the understanding of militias during the late 18th century. At that time, militias were essential for local defense and served as a check against both internal unrest and external threats. The phrase, well-regulated militia, in the Second Amendment is seen by supporters of this view as an indication that the right to bear arms is linked to service in such a militia. Judicial and scholarly support. In the early 20th century, the collective right view gained traction in legal and scholarly circles. Some legal scholars and courts interpreted the Second Amendment as protecting the ability of states to organize militias, with individual gun ownership considered secondary to this collective purpose. This interpretation was reflected in several judicial rulings which suggested that the amendment did not guarantee an individual right to own firearms outside of militia service. The U.S. Supreme Court's decision in United States v. Miller, 1939, is often cited by proponents of the collective right interpretation. In this case, the court upheld the National Firearms Act of 1934, which regulated certain types of firearms, stating that the Second Amendment did not guarantee an individual's right to own a sawed-off shotgun, as such a weapon was not considered reasonable for militia use. Modern implications. In contemporary discussions, the collective right interpretation is often associated with arguments for stricter gun control measures. Advocates for this view contend that regulating firearms is consistent with the Second Amendment's emphasis on maintaining a well-regulated militia and ensuring public safety. Individual right interpretation. In contrast, the individual right interpretation argues that the Second Amendment guarantees each person's right to own and possess firearms for personal use, including self-defense, hunting, and other lawful purposes. This perspective emphasizes the protection of individual liberties and personal autonomy. Historical context. The individual right interpretation gained prominence in the latter half of the 20th century. Proponents argue that the Second Amendment's language, specifically the right of the people to keep and bear arms, indicates that the right to bear arms is an individual right. This view aligns with the broader understanding of the people in the Constitution as referring to individual citizens rather than groups or states. Judicial and scholarly support. The individual right interpretation was affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court in the landmark case District of Columbia v. Heller, 2008. The court ruled that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess a firearm unconnected with service in a militia and to use it for traditionally lawful purposes, such as self-defense within the home. The Heller decision marked a significant shift from earlier interpretations, reinforcing the notion that the Second Amendment guarantees individual rights. In McDonald v. City of Chicago, 2010, the Supreme Court extended this individual right interpretation by ruling that the Second Amendment applies to state and local governments through the incorporation doctrine, thus reinforcing that individual gun rights are protected across the entire United States. Modern implications. The individual right interpretation is often cited by advocates for gun rights and those opposing restrictive gun control measures. Proponents argue that protecting individual gun ownership is essential for personal security and preserving democratic freedoms. This perspective has influenced legislation and public policy, reflecting a broader emphasis on personal liberty and self-defense. Comparative analysis. The tension between these interpretations reflects deeper debates about the role of government, personal freedoms, and public safety. The collective right interpretation emphasizes the importance of organized militias and state authority, while the individual right interpretation focuses on personal liberties and individual self-defense. Both perspectives have shaped legal and political discussions about gun rights and regulation in the United States. The debate continues to evolve as new legal interpretations, societal changes, and policy decisions influence the understanding and application of the Second Amendment. In summary, the collective and individual right interpretations of the Second Amendment offer distinct perspectives on the amendment's purpose and scope. The collective right view emphasizes the role of militias and state authority, while the individual right view highlights personal freedoms and self-defense. Understanding these interpretations provides insight into the ongoing debates surrounding gun rights and regulation in American society. The Supreme Court's decision in District of Columbia v. Heller, 2008, marked a pivotal moment in the interpretation of the Second Amendment. The case solidified the individual right interpretation of the amendment, affirming that it protects an individual's right to possess firearms for lawful purposes, including self-defense within the home. This landmark ruling has had profound implications for gun rights and regulation in the United States. Case background. The Heller case arose from a legal challenge to Washington, D.C.'s stringent gun control laws. The District of Columbia had enacted a series of regulations that included a ban on handgun possession and a requirement that all firearms in the home be kept unloaded and disassembled or bound by a trigger lock. Dick Anthony Heller, a special police officer who was authorized to carry a handgun while on duty, challenged these regulations on the grounds that they violated his Second Amendment rights. Heller argued that the D.C. laws infringed upon his individual right to possess a functional firearm in his home for self-defense. The case eventually made its way to the Supreme Court, which was tasked with determining whether the Second Amendment protected an individual's right to own firearms for personal use, independent of militia service. Supreme Court's decision. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Heller, with Justice Antonin Scalia writing the majority opinion. The court's ruling was significant for several reasons. Affirmation of individual rights. The court affirmed that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual's right to possess firearms for self-defense within the home. This decision marked a departure from earlier interpretations that had emphasized the collective right to maintain militias. The ruling clarified that the amendment protects an individual's right to own and use firearms, separate from militia service. Interpretation of the Second Amendment. Justice Scalia's opinion provided a detailed analysis of the Second Amendment's text and historical context. The court held that the amendment's prefatory clause, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, did not limit the scope of the operative clause, which states, "The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Scalia argued that the operative clause guaranteed an individual's right to possess and carry weapons, as the term, "the people," is used in the Constitution to refer to individual rights, as seen in other amendments. Limitation of gun control measures. While the court ruled in favor of Heller's individual right to possess a firearm, it also acknowledged that the right to bear arms was not absolute. The decision made clear that the Second Amendment allows for regulations and restrictions, such as prohibitions on firearm possession by felons or the mentally ill, and regulations concerning the carrying of firearms in sensitive places like schools and government buildings. The ruling did not invalidate all gun control laws but set a standard that such laws must not infringe upon the core right to self-defense in the home. Impact and implications. The Heller decision had a profound impact on the legal landscape of gun rights and regulation in the United States. Legal precedent. The ruling established a new legal precedent by affirming the individual right interpretation of the Second Amendment. It provided a judicial framework for evaluating future gun control laws and has been cited in subsequent cases concerning gun rights and regulations. Influence on subsequent cases. Following Heller, the Supreme Court addressed the scope of the Second Amendment in McDonald v. City of Chicago, 2010, which extended the individual right to possess firearms to state and local governments through the incorporation doctrine. The Heller decision also influenced numerous lower court rulings and legislative efforts related to gun control and individual rights. Public and political response. The decision generated significant public and political debate. Advocates for gun rights hailed the ruling as a victory for individual liberties and self-defense, while proponents of gun control expressed concerns about the implications for public safety and regulatory authority. The decision intensified the national conversation on gun rights, contributing to ongoing debates about the balance between individual freedoms and societal safety. Criticisms and controversies. While Heller was a landmark decision, it has faced criticism and controversy. Criticisms of judicial reasoning. Some legal scholars and commentators have criticized the court's interpretation of the Second Amendment, arguing that it diverges from historical understandings and the framers' original intent. Critics contend that the ruling may have overemphasized individual rights at the expense of broader public safety considerations. Challenges in implementation. The decision has led to challenges in implementing gun control measures that comply with the court's interpretation while addressing concerns about gun violence and safety. Jurisdictions across the country have grappled with how to craft regulations that are consistent with Heller while balancing the need for effective gun control. Conclusion. The Supreme Court's decision in District of Columbia v. Heller was a landmark ruling that affirmed the individual right interpretation of the Second Amendment, emphasizing the right to possess firearms for self-defense within the home. The decision reshaped the legal and political landscape of gun rights in the United States, influencing subsequent court rulings, legislative actions, and public debates. While the ruling has been praised for its affirmation of individual liberties, it has also sparked ongoing discussions about the balance between personal rights and public safety. The Supreme Court's decision in McDonald v. City of Chicago, 2010, was a landmark ruling that extended the individual right interpretation of the Second Amendment to state and local governments. This case built upon the principles established in District of Columbia v. Heller, 2008, and affirmed that the Second Amendment's protections against gun control measures are applicable not only at the federal level but also to state and municipal laws. Case background. The McDonald case arose from a legal challenge to Chicago's handgun ban. Otis McDonald, a resident of Chicago, argued that the city's strict regulations on handgun ownership violated his Second Amendment rights. McDonald, a retired maintenance worker and a self-identified gun owner, sought to own a handgun for self-defense, especially in light of rising crime rates in his neighborhood. Chicago's handgun ban, which was in place at the time, severely restricted the ability of residents to possess firearms within their homes. McDonald's challenge was based on the argument that the Second Amendment's guarantee of an individual right to possess firearms should be applicable not only to federal laws but also to state and local regulations. His case raised the question of whether the Second Amendment's protections were incorporated to apply to the states through the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. Supreme Court's decision. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of McDonald, effectively extending the Second Amendment's protections to state and local governments. Justice Samuel Alito wrote the majority opinion, which was joined by Chief Justice John Roberts and Justices Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas, and Anthony Kennedy. Extension of individual rights. The court's ruling in McDonald confirmed that the individual right to possess firearms, as established in Heller, is a fundamental right that applies to the states through the 14th Amendment's incorporation doctrine. The decision affirmed that the Second Amendment's protections against federal gun control measures also restrict state and local governments from enacting overly restrictive regulations that infringe upon an individual's right to bear arms. Incorporation doctrine. The incorporation doctrine, which stems from the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause, was central to the McDonald decision. The court held that certain fundamental rights, including the right to bear arms, are incorporated and thus applicable to the states. This was consistent with previous decisions where the Supreme Court had ruled that various provisions of the Bill of Rights apply to the states through the 14th Amendment. Reasoning and precedent. Justice Alito's opinion emphasized that the right to self-defense is a fundamental aspect of liberty and should be protected against infringement by state and local governments. The court's reasoning was rooted in the belief that the right to bear arms is essential for individual self-defense and personal security, and as such, it deserves protection from excessive governmental regulation at all levels. Impact and implications. The McDonald decision had significant implications for gun rights and regulation across the United States. Expansion of Second Amendment protections. By extending the Second Amendment's protections to state and local governments, the McDonald ruling significantly expanded the scope of individual gun rights. It ensured that state and municipal laws must adhere to the standards established by Heller and cannot impose restrictions that infringe upon the right to possess firearms for lawful purposes. Influence on gun control legislation. The ruling influenced the crafting and implementation of gun control measures at the state and local levels. Jurisdictions that previously had stringent gun control laws had to reevaluate and adjust their regulations to comply with the McDonald decision. This has led to legal challenges and revisions of various local gun control laws across the country. Judicial and legal precedents. McDonald has been cited in subsequent legal cases involving gun rights and regulations. It reinforced the individual right interpretation of the Second Amendment and has been used as a precedent in arguments and rulings concerning firearm ownership and regulation. The decision also provided a framework for evaluating the constitutionality of state and local gun control measures. Criticisms and controversies. The McDonald decision has faced criticism and sparked controversy. Criticisms of judicial interpretation. Some critics argue that the extension of Second Amendment protections to the states may undermine local governments' ability to enact reasonable gun control measures tailored to their specific needs. Critics contend that the decision could limit the ability of states and municipalities to address local issues related to gun violence and public safety effectively. Challenges in implementation. The ruling has led to ongoing legal and political debates about the balance between individual rights and public safety. Implementing gun control measures that comply with McDonald while addressing concerns about gun violence remains a contentious issue. Jurisdictions must navigate the complex interplay between protecting individual rights and ensuring community safety. Conclusion. The Supreme Court's decision in McDonald v. City of Chicago was a landmark ruling that extended the individual right interpretation of the Second Amendment to state and local governments. By affirming that the Second Amendment's protections apply beyond the federal level, the court solidified the right to possess firearms as a fundamental right protected by the 14th Amendment. This decision has had far-reaching implications for gun rights and regulation, influencing legal precedents, legislative actions, and public debates about the balance between individual liberties and public safety. Despite the Supreme Court's affirmation of the individual right to bear arms in District of Columbia v. Heller, 2008, and McDonald v. City of Chicago, 2010, the Second Amendment is not an absolute right. Both decisions recognized that the right to possess firearms is subject to reasonable regulation. In balancing individual gun rights with public safety, governments at various levels have implemented several measures to regulate firearm ownership and use. These measures include background checks, waiting periods, and restrictions on firearm ownership for certain individuals. Background checks. Background checks are a critical component of gun control regulations designed to prevent individuals who are legally prohibited from owning firearms from obtaining them. These checks are conducted through the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS, which is maintained by the FBI. Purpose and implementation. The primary purpose of background checks is to ensure that firearms do not fall into the hands of individuals who pose a risk to themselves or others. This includes screening for criminal records, mental health issues, and other factors that might disqualify a person from legally owning a firearm. Federal law mandates background checks for all gun purchases from licensed dealers, but there are variations in requirements for private sales, which are not uniformly regulated across all states. Impact on gun purchases. Background checks have been instrumental in preventing certain individuals from acquiring firearms. Studies suggest that these checks have played a role in reducing gun violence by identifying and disqualifying individuals with felony convictions, domestic violence restraining orders, or serious mental health issues. However, the effectiveness of background checks is influenced by the completeness and accuracy of the records in the NICS database. Criticisms and challenges. Critics argue that background checks can sometimes be burdensome for law-abiding citizens and may not always be effective in preventing illegal gun sales, especially in cases where records are incomplete or inaccurate. There are also debates over the extent of background check requirements, with some advocating for more comprehensive checks, including those for private sales and gun shows. Waiting periods. Waiting periods are designed to provide a cooling-off period between the purchase of a firearm and its actual possession. The goal is to reduce impulsive acts of violence, including suicides and crimes of passion. Purpose and implementation. The waiting period typically ranges from a few days to several weeks, depending on state laws. This time allows for additional background checks to be completed, provides a buffer period for individuals reconsidering their purchase, and aims to prevent the immediate use of firearms in situations of heightened emotional distress. Impact on public safety. Evidence suggests that waiting periods can have a positive impact on reducing gun-related suicides and violent crimes. By delaying the transfer of a firearm, waiting periods can help prevent impulsive acts of violence and provide time for individuals to seek help if they are experiencing mental health issues or are in a crisis. Criticisms and challenges. Opponents of waiting periods argue that they infringe on the rights of law-abiding gun owners and may not significantly affect violent crime rates. There are also concerns about the potential inconvenience and delays that waiting periods can impose on individuals who need to obtain firearms for legitimate reasons, such as self-defense or hunting. C. Prohibited categories. Laws that restrict firearm ownership for certain categories of individuals are designed to prevent those who are deemed a greater risk from owning or carrying guns. These categories typically include convicted felons, individuals with restraining orders, and those adjudicated as mentally ill. Categories and restrictions. Convicted felons. Federal law prohibits individuals convicted of felonies from owning firearms. This restriction is based on the premise that those with a history of serious criminal behavior are more likely to misuse firearms. Individuals with restraining orders. People subject to domestic violence restraining orders or similar legal orders are generally prohibited from owning firearms. This measure aims to protect victims of domestic violence and prevent further harm. Mentally ill individuals. Federal law also restricts firearm ownership for individuals who have been adjudicated as mentally ill or have been involuntarily committed to mental health facilities. These restrictions are intended to address concerns about self-harm and potential violence. Impact on public safety. These restrictions are designed to enhance public safety by preventing high-risk individuals from accessing firearms. Evidence suggests that such measures can reduce incidents of gun violence and enhance protection for vulnerable populations. Criticisms and challenges. Critics of these restrictions argue that they can sometimes be overly broad or applied inconsistently, potentially infringing on the rights of individuals who may have rehabilitated or who do not pose a significant risk. There are also debates about the effectiveness of these restrictions in preventing gun violence and ensuring due process for affected individuals. Conclusion. The regulation of firearms through background checks, waiting periods, and restrictions on certain categories of individuals reflects an effort to balance the individual right to bear arms with the need to protect public safety. While these measures aim to prevent gun violence and misuse, they also face criticisms and challenges related to their implementation and impact. The ongoing debate over gun control and regulation underscores the complexity of reconciling constitutional rights with contemporary concerns about safety and security. The Second Amendment has been a central point of contention in debates over gun control policies in the United States. Discussions often focus on various aspects of firearm regulation, including bans on assault weapons, concealed carry permits, and the sale of firearms at gun shows. These debates highlight the tension between individual gun rights and public safety, with differing opinions on the best approach to regulating firearms while respecting constitutional protections. A. Assault weapons bans. Assault weapons bans are one of the most contentious issues in the gun control debate. These bans seek to restrict or prohibit the sale and possession of firearms that are considered to be high capacity and designed for rapid fire, often characterized by features such as detachable magazines, pistol grips, and adjustable stocks. Purpose and arguments. Proponents of assault weapons bans argue that these firearms are designed primarily for military and law enforcement use, and their civilian ownership can contribute to increased gun violence and mass shootings. They contend that limiting access to such weapons could enhance public safety by reducing the lethality of potential attacks. Opponents, however, argue that such bans infringe upon the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. They assert that assault weapons are often used for lawful purposes such as hunting and self-defense, and that the term assault weapon is sometimes used imprecisely to include a wide range of firearms. Critics also argue that focusing on specific types of firearms might not effectively address the broader issue of gun violence. Historical context. The federal assault weapons ban of 1994, enacted as part of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, prohibited the manufacture and sale of certain semi-automatic firearms and high-capacity magazines. The ban expired in 2004, and efforts to reinstate or expand it have faced significant political and legal challenges. B. Concealed carry permits. Concealed carry permits allow individuals to carry a concealed firearm in public. The policies and requirements for obtaining these permits vary widely from state to state, ranging from shall issue laws, where permits must be granted if applicants meet certain criteria, to may issue laws, where authorities have discretion in issuing permits. Purpose and arguments. Proponents of concealed carry argue that it enhances personal safety and allows individuals to defend themselves in dangerous situations. They believe that allowing responsible citizens to carry concealed weapons deters crime and provides a means of self-defense. Critics, however, express concerns that increasing the number of concealed carry permits could lead to more incidents of gun violence or accidental shootings. They argue that more stringent regulations and training requirements are necessary to ensure that those carrying concealed weapons are adequately prepared to use them safely and responsibly. Legal developments. The Supreme Court Case District of Columbia v. Heller, 2008, established an individual right to possess firearms for self-defense in the home, but it did not directly address concealed carry outside the home. Subsequent rulings, such as McDonald v. City of Chicago, 2010, extended Second Amendment protections to state and local governments, influencing the regulation of concealed carry. States have continued to grapple with how to balance these rights with public safety concerns. C. Sale of firearms at gun shows. The sale of firearms at gun shows, often conducted by private sellers, is another area of debate in the gun control discussion. These transactions sometimes occur without background checks or other regulatory oversight, leading to concerns about the potential for firearms to end up in the hands of prohibited individuals. Purpose and arguments. Advocates for regulating gun sales at shows argue that requiring background checks for all gun purchases, including those made by private sellers at gun shows, would help prevent individuals with criminal records or mental health issues from obtaining firearms. They believe that closing the gun show loophole would reduce the risk of illegal gun trafficking and enhance overall public safety. Opponents argue that imposing additional regulations on gun shows infringes upon the rights of lawful gun owners and could create unnecessary bureaucratic hurdles for private sellers. They contend that most gun show transactions are conducted responsibly and that existing background check systems should be sufficient to ensure public safety. Legislative efforts. Efforts to regulate firearms sales at gun shows have included proposals for universal background checks and other measures aimed at closing the loophole. However, these proposals have faced significant resistance and have not been uniformly adopted across states. Conclusion. The debates over gun control policies, such as assault weapons bans, concealed carry permits, and the sale of firearms at gun shows, reflect the complex interplay between individual rights and public safety. These issues highlight the ongoing challenge of crafting regulations that both respect the Second Amendment and address concerns about gun violence and misuse. As societal attitudes and legal interpretations evolve, the debate over gun control will continue to be a prominent and contentious aspect of American public policy. The Second Amendment has been a central point of contention in debates over gun control policies in the United States. Discussions often focus on various aspects of firearm regulation, including bans on assault weapons, concealed carry permits, and the sale of firearms at gun shows. These debates highlight the tension between individual gun rights and public safety, with differing opinions on the best approach to regulating firearms while respecting constitutional protections. A. Assault weapons bans. Assault weapons bans are one of the most contentious issues in the gun control debate. These bans seek to restrict or prohibit the sale and possession of firearms that are considered to be high capacity and designed for rapid fire, often characterized by features such as detachable magazines, pistol grips, and adjustable stocks. Purpose and arguments. Proponents of assault weapons bans argue that these firearms are designed primarily for military and law enforcement use, and their civilian ownership can contribute to increased gun violence and mass shootings. They contend that limiting access to such weapons could enhance public safety by reducing the lethality of potential attacks. Opponents, however, argue that such bans infringe upon the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. They assert that assault weapons are often used for lawful purposes such as hunting and self-defense, and that the term assault weapon is sometimes used imprecisely to include a wide range of firearms. Critics also argue that focusing on specific types of firearms might not effectively address the broader issue of gun violence. Historical context. The federal assault weapons ban of 1994, enacted as part of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, prohibited the manufacture and sale of certain semi-automatic firearms and high-capacity magazines. The ban expired in 2004, and efforts to reinstate or expand it have faced significant political and legal challenges. B. Concealed carry permits. Concealed carry permits allow individuals to carry a concealed firearm in public. The policies and requirements for obtaining these permits vary widely from state to state, ranging from shall issue laws, where permits must be granted if applicants meet certain criteria, to may issue laws, where authorities have discretion in issuing permits. Purpose and arguments. Proponents of concealed carry argue that it enhances personal safety and allows individuals to defend themselves in dangerous situations. They believe that allowing responsible citizens to carry concealed weapons deters crime and provides a means of self-defense. Critics, however, express concerns that increasing the number of concealed carry permits could lead to more incidents of gun violence or accidental shootings. They argue that more stringent regulations and training requirements are necessary to ensure that those carrying concealed weapons are adequately prepared to use them safely and responsibly. Legal developments. The Supreme Court case District of Columbia v. Heller, 2008, established an individual right to possess firearms for self-defense in the home, but it did not directly address concealed carry outside the home. Subsequent rulings, such as McDonald v. City of Chicago, 2010, extended Second Amendment protections to state and local governments, influencing the regulation of concealed carry. States have continued to grapple with how to balance these rights with public safety concerns. C. Sale of firearms at gun shows. The sale of firearms at gun shows, often conducted by private sellers, is another area of debate in the gun control discussion. These transactions sometimes occur without background checks or other regulatory oversight, leading to concerns about the potential for firearms to end up in the hands of prohibited individuals. Purpose and arguments. Advocates for regulating gun sales at shows argue that requiring background checks for all gun purchases, including those made by private sellers at gun shows, would help prevent individuals with criminal records or mental health issues from obtaining firearms. They believe that closing the gun show loophole would reduce the risk of illegal gun trafficking and enhance overall public safety. Opponents argue that imposing additional regulations on gun shows infringes upon the rights of lawful gun owners and could create unnecessary bureaucratic hurdles for private sellers. They contend that most gun show transactions are conducted responsibly and that existing background check systems should be sufficient to ensure public safety. Legislative efforts. Efforts to regulate firearms sales at gun shows have included proposals for universal background checks and other measures aimed at closing the loophole. However, these proposals have faced significant resistance and have not been uniformly adopted across states. Conclusion. The debates over gun control policies, such as assault weapons bans, concealed carry permits, and the sale of firearms at gun shows, reflect the complex interplay between individual rights and public safety. These issues highlight the ongoing challenge of crafting regulations that both respect the Second Amendment and address concerns about gun violence and misuse. As societal attitudes and legal interpretations evolve, the debate over gun control will continue to be a prominent and contentious aspect of American public policy. The ongoing debates over gun control in the United States are increasingly shaped by contemporary issues such as mass shootings and the intersection of mental health with firearm access. These concerns have intensified discussions about the need for stricter regulations and more effective measures to prevent gun violence while addressing complex social factors. Mass shootings. Mass shootings, characterized by incidents in which multiple people are killed or injured in a single event, have become a focal point in the gun control debate. The frequency and severity of these tragedies have spurred calls for more stringent gun control measures to prevent such incidents and enhance public safety. Impact on public perception. Mass shootings often generate widespread public outcry and bring the issue of gun control to the forefront of national discussions. High-profile events, such as the shootings at Sandy Hook Elementary School, 2012, Pulse nightclub, 2016, and Uvalde, Texas, 2022, have led to increased calls for legislative action and reform. These tragedies underscore the need to address both the availability of firearms and the factors contributing to violent behavior. Proposed measures. In response to mass shootings, various proposals have been put forward to improve gun control and prevent future tragedies. Some of the most commonly discussed measures include assault weapons bans, expanding or reinstating bans on high-capacity magazines and assault weapons is frequently proposed as a way to reduce the lethality of mass shootings. Proponents argue that these firearms are often used in mass shootings due to their firepower and capacity for rapid fire. Universal background checks. Implementing universal background checks for all gun purchases, including private sales and transactions at gun shows, is seen as a way to ensure that firearms do not end up in the hands of individuals with a history of violence or criminal activity. Red flag laws. Also known as extreme risk protection orders, red flag laws allow for the temporary removal of firearms from individuals who are deemed a risk to themselves or others. These laws are intended to prevent potentially dangerous individuals from accessing guns during periods of crisis. Enhanced reporting and enforcement. Improving the reporting and enforcement of existing gun laws, including ensuring that records of prohibited individuals are accurately entered into background check databases, is another proposed measure to prevent gun violence. Criticisms and challenges. Efforts to address mass shootings through stricter gun control measures face significant challenges. Critics argue that such measures may infringe upon the rights of law-abiding citizens and question their effectiveness in preventing mass shootings. Additionally, there are concerns about the implementation and enforcement of new regulations, as well as the need for a comprehensive approach that addresses the root causes of violence. Mental health. The intersection of mental health and firearm access is a complex issue that involves balancing the rights of individuals with the need to prevent gun violence. Addressing this intersection requires careful consideration of how mental health treatment and access to firearms are managed. Challenges and concerns. Access to mental health care. Ensuring that individuals receive appropriate mental health treatment is a critical component in addressing the risk of gun violence. However, many people with mental health issues do not receive adequate care due to barriers such as stigma, lack of access to services, and insufficient insurance coverage. Firearm restrictions. There are legal restrictions on firearm ownership for individuals who have been adjudicated as mentally ill or involuntarily committed to mental health facilities. These restrictions aim to prevent individuals who may pose a risk of self-harm or harm to others from obtaining firearms. However, the implementation of these restrictions can be inconsistent, and there are concerns about due process and the potential for these restrictions to be applied too broadly. Balancing rights and safety. Finding the right balance between protecting individual rights and ensuring public safety is challenging. While it is important to prevent individuals with severe mental health issues from accessing firearms, there is also a need to protect the rights of individuals who are receiving treatment and are not considered a danger to themselves or others. Stigma and misconceptions. Addressing mental health issues in the context of gun control also involves combating stigma and misconceptions. Mental health problems are often misunderstood and inaccurately linked to violence, which can contribute to discriminatory practices and hinder effective policy solutions. Proposed solutions. Several approaches are proposed to address the intersection of mental health and firearm access. Improved access to mental health services. Increasing access to mental health care and support services can help address underlying issues that may contribute to violence. This includes enhancing funding for mental health programs, reducing stigma, and improving insurance coverage. Targeted gun control measures. Implementing targeted measures, such as enhanced background checks and red flag laws, can help identify and address individuals at risk without broadly infringing upon rights. Ensuring that mental health data is accurately reported and used in background checks is essential for effective regulation. Education and training. Providing education and training for mental health professionals, law enforcement, and the public can help improve the understanding of mental health issues and their relationship to gun violence. This can also foster better collaboration between mental health and law enforcement agencies. Conclusion. Current debates and challenges in gun control are heavily influenced by the issues of mass shootings and mental health. The need to prevent tragedies while addressing complex social and legal concerns requires a nuanced approach that balances individual rights with public safety. Proposals such as assault weapons bans, universal background checks, and red flag laws are part of the ongoing discussion, as are efforts to improve mental health care and address the intersection of mental health and firearm access. As these issues continue to evolve, finding effective and equitable solutions remains a key challenge in the gun control debate.